Jai Sri Ram. Welcome, Rajanji. Thank you for joining Bharat Mark from UK, where it is a epicenter of a huge riot. That's what we are going to discuss upon, friends. Just to kind of give you some information about Rajanji. Okay, Rajan Singh Nazran, the chief explorer of Global India series. Rajan is a award-winning journalist, global explorer, having completed over 65 countries so far. He has traveled all over and covered many issues, which we have discussed a few in Bharat Marg. Okay. And the Global Indian Series is the official platform for the people of Indian origin. It is it is a morning ground for open, liberal discussion, and constant and content is available for in 48 plus countries. Okay, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. And before going further, friends, if you are here for first time, please make sure to subscribe the channel and press the notification button, and also like the video. Okay, thank you for joining, Rajanji.
No, it's a pleasure to be here. I think one thing that I always love, we may not always agree on the big
Absolutely.
topics, but the fact that we still remain friends and we have open discourses, I think shows where humanity should be heading. So it's always a pleasure to be on your platform here. It's always a pleasure to be in touch with you as well. And thank you for reaching out to me over the said subject
Absolutely.
as well.
See, as the saying goes, if two people think alike always, then there is no need for one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. Absolutely. But
So we are very happy to be here, and I always want to make sure that different thought process can come in. Otherwise there is no discussion at all.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the important aspect is the fact that we can all unitedly have a discussion without fear or favor and take on essentially what is taking place right now. I know in the UK right now we're at the epicenter of what I believe is more of an identity war than that
Hmm.
of a religious prospect. But we'll go into more of that later on. But it is good to be here. But it's
Hmm.
a shame that we're speaking at a time of such unfortunate events that have taken place in a city like Leicester, and now he's obviously taken place here in Birmingham as well.
Absolutely. And say me, what is really happening in UK? So much of terror. What's happening?
It's so essentially how it kick started off. There's a cricket match that took place that everybody remembers. It was India v Pakistan. It
Right.
was watched across the globe. Pakistan won on the last over. In itself, it was a great match to watch because you could see the camaraderie of the
Hmm.
players on the pitch. They realize this is a sporting game. They're not fighting for national honor. They're not fighting a war. They're fighting a good game of cricket on a pitch. What
Right.
it done to was the normal celebrations that took place, and this happened to be in Leicester, where you had groups of people out in the street celebrating the fact that Pakistan had won against India. More so, I think it was also the fact that it was just a celebration for celebration's sake. What then continued to happen was that was almost hijacked by this moronic behavior whereby people started having fights in the streets of Leicester. And essentially, it started to happen between India fans and Pakistani fans. Now, we have to remember this as well. Regardless of what thought system you uphold in India or as a person of Indian origin, there's more Muslims in India than there are in Pakistan. So there would have been a lot of fans that were supporting India. There were also Muslims in the streets of Leicester.
Right.
So then when you saw all these reports coming in talking about this is a Hindu-Muslim conflict, well, no, this was people supporting India's team and Pakistan's team. And again, a vast proportion of those people who would be Muslim were from
Hmm.
the Indian side, would have been supporting the Indian team. So this has got nothing to do with cricket at all. It just turned itself into the ugly vise of identity politics. From there, what some reports were speculating was that a Sikh guy was attacked in a pizza shop by Hindu mobs and they're part of RSS. Now, for me, Baji, you realize, and we've had this discussion before, my
Hmm.
faith is to do with me. And my faith of choice is that of the Sikh community, the faith along the Sikh commandments from there. My identity is one of being somebody who's human. And so therefore my religious perspectives is one aspect, but is not my human aspect. There's a lot more to it. It allows me to obviously understand the humanity through one vibes, but I'm not just that identity of that. So this Sikh guy apparently was attacked by the Hindu community and he ran into a pizza shop for help. I've been speaking to a lot of people on the ground and people in the know in Leicester. And in fact, we'll be doing a podcast soon with those individuals. The person wasn't from the Sikh community. I believe it was somebody from the Muslim community that was going in there. And it was actually also people from the Hindu community. They're turning around to people saying, what on earth are you doing? We're all neighbors. Why are you attacking each other over a cricket match? This isn't who we are as human beings. Forget about religion, forget about cricket. This is absolutely mental. What then occurred on is that you had these fractions that were brought together, and we saw this whole new loose of social media that started to say that the Hindus were attacking the Muslims are attacking the Hindus. And then as Chinese whispers go, you see this massive bombshell take place in Leicester where people start to fight amongst each other on ideas of religion, something that is arbitrary to say the least. So that's what occurs on that side. Now, at the same time, obviously, you had different pujas that were taking place. So people in the streets of Leicester were going out there for the pujas. And from what it turned out, some people in the community, from the Muslim community, said, look, intentionally, these guys started doing their demonstrations, coming closer and closer to the masjid. Now, I don't know how factual that is, but knowing how the human psyche is, I can imagine that there would be some element of truth, because what many people started turning as religion, they turn into tribalism. So essentially, it's my badge of honor that I'm going to portray through the streets and create this issue. On the other side, there was social media wars. People from the Muslim community were saying that our community now being attacked by the Hindu mobs. We need now to galvanize ourselves and do something back. Then what happens? The Hindu community, certain aspects of that, they got reports coming in that the Muslim community are attacking them. And now all of a sudden you got this circus of activity is drawn forward by social media and fake news. Now we don't know who instigated those. All we know is that this was going through. This could have been the EDL from all we know, English Defence League. But the fact that these messages are going through, and this is what creates chaos. Now, I'm not ignorant to know that the moment that we have tribalism within communities where identity is no longer human and identity is that of a religious perspective, and the identity comes out of a national form of countries who don't really think about you on a day-to-day basis, i.e. India and Pakistan, and you're fighting on their behalf in the streets, well, you're going to get a lot of loose nuts out there. And that's kind of what pushed a lot of this further elements. It wasn't just...
But let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question, if I may. Okay. See, I am not so intrigued by the mob or mob attack that happened, in the temple. But what like this, you can see here, the guy was flashing and doing the thing in front of the temple, which you would have seen the video anyway.
Yeah.
What intrigued me was the police was standing there so helplessly and doing nothing.
It's a really tough time because you had a couple of big issues taking place at the same time. And look, I do not work with the police, so I can't speak on the behalf of the British government in any sense. But bearing in mind, we had a state funeral in England, in London, where you had a vast majority of police officers that were called in. So the last thing anybody actually thought was that something like this would take place. So a lot of the police were overwhelmed. You had huge amounts of people outweighing the police forces. So what could you do under those circumstances? That's the first thing. The second thing on my side is absolutely deplorable that any community will attack another community's place of worship. Now, I have my own viewpoints on places of worship as a whole, which you know as well, but I think it was a really bad thing what took place. One thing that the reports didn't also showcase was that you actually did have imams. You had people you had the guys from the mandara, you had even people Gyanya from the Gurdwara that are outside these mandirs saying, what on earth are we doing? Stop this, it's ridiculous. So, what we saw on one side was this action taking place against the Hindu place of worship, which should not be happening. We saw the police being absolutely overwhelmed by this because there's limited numbers that were available. So it was mob rule. And then we also saw those champions, those custodians of those religious identities coming out equally in numbers saying, this is wrong, stop this is absolutely stupid. And those included faith members from the Hindu community, from the Muslim community, and the Sikh community as well, coming hand in hand saying, this isn't what our community custodianship is. That side of that was never really showcased in the media, but obviously it was overshadowed, and rightly overshadowed, for the fact that you had mobs outside of places of worship doing this. Now, to add on to that, and I will come back to your question about the police functionality of this. The Muslim community was saying that we're outside of these temples because you had a RSS speaker, Sadhvi Vitambara, who was turning around, who was going to speak at these areas. And she's obviously known for her far right views. And so these guys are saying, we're here in peaceful demonstration. Now, legitimately, I think that there's something right about demonstrating. However, I think if you're wearing a balaclava, if you're covering your face, and it's not under COVID regulations, let's say that, and you're out in numbers of over 200 people plus, and you're shouting at certain elements, I don't know how much of that message was used as a social lubricant to justify your own hate. Now,
just for people who don't know about Sadhvi Ratambara, okay, these guys are just spreading fake news. I was just there in her ashram, okay.
Yeah.
She runs an ashram where it's for the orphans, okay. Thousands of kids live there, and women who have been sacked by their husbands and their family for whatever reason, she is doing such a phenomenal social reforming work. And these guys, Sadhvi Ridambara, again, I know her work, how much work she has been doing. Okay.
It's a difficult one for me, Budgie, and the reason why is because, one, I don't know enough about her. Two, what I do know about her are things that I don't personally agree with. I think the fact that you're turning around saying every Hindu in India should have 4 kids, 2 of which need to be dedicated towards India to make it Hindu Rashtra, that I don't agree with.
Yeah, but see, what I am saying is we will go to the first point where we started this conversation with.
Absolutely.
That is, in a civilized society, everybody will have a freedom of speech to
and
come
I
and
agree
share
with that.
Their thoughts.
Absolutely. And that I do agree with, and that I uphold, because again, we may not share the same ideas of how the world is, but we do share a similar vision to what humanity is, what it means to be human. So therefore, under that vise opens up the opportunity to have open dialogue, to have discussions. And so therefore, if she was there, I think the better thing to have done is saying, yes, you can have the freedom to demonstrate, but also there should be the opportunity for open discourses. But that should be to everybody without fear or favor. So therefore, if you do have a person from the Sikh community who comes in, who has different viewpoints, they should also be upheld to having debate and demonstrations. If you have somebody from the Muslim community, it should be exactly the same thing.
And you come inside and ask questions,
as long as it's done in an open forum where that is open and available. Yeah. But that's a cultural element. But coming back to this part here, because that's obviously what the discussion is. This was the vise that people had to say, well, we're demonstrating. Now, personally, if you ask me, I think where we see the real issues is not this, because this is the content. This is almost a practical embodiment. Where the real issues that we have to ask ourselves as a UK and as people around the world is saying, how did we get here? What has created a system where we think it's genuinely okay to go to the streets, to fight amongst each other as human beings, as one of a trillion species on this planet, to fight in the streets amongst each other, and then for the other elements of society to attack each other's places of worship? When did we think that that was right to do? And why do we enable that to happen? Now, for me personally, I think we have to go a lot deeper. We saw the consequences of this mindset of exclusivity taking place between both communities. And I think when we start having a look at, one, the role of the media and what that played towards galvanizing people to the streets. 2, we start seeing the role of civic society leaders, those who are heads of mandira, mosques, gurdwara, churches coming together. And then we look at the role of politics. I think there lies the problem. When we had a look at Leicester, and the question that I was speaking amongst other people saying, well, Leicester has seen almost this community of South Asians coming together in one of the most weirdest ways possible, because 50 years ago, a lot of these guys were kicked out of countries such as Uganda, for example, and that came down to ethnic hatred. And they were kicked out regardless of their religion, if they're Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, or Jewish. And a lot of these guys found their way into Leicester. At that time, Leicester was far right. You had this far right English Defence League that didn't want anybody of South Asian culture that was there, let alone regardless of your religion. Now, 50 years on, we're seeing inward fighting amongst communities who are calling Leicester home that came from right the way across the globe. So then we have to look back at the politics and saying, well, actually, you have a lot of Muslim councillors, a lot of Hindu councillors in Leicester, and they are representing their constituents who are overwhelmingly from their faith. So therefore, then, is it the politics of at hand that has enabled this almost tribal-like structures to take place? Because for them, it's vote harvesting, and therefore, were they almost, and I'm only saying as conjecture, were they adding fuel to the flames to say, you're now part of this community, you're part of this community, I represent you as a Hindu, I represent you as a Muslim. And so therefore, 50 years on, all we've created is almost mini kingdoms in there. And that's what's
Absolutely.
almost created fuel to the fire. So are the politicians to blame in the
Uh,
structure?
I have a question here. Okay. I know Rishi Sunak ran for prime minister and lost. Okay. How much impact this riot had on that? You
I, I
think
don't I don't think
maybe
so.
they thought politically certain
No.
community is coming up. I'm just
It's
or
but you,
the reason I'm asking is, he lost and his competitor is a prime minister now. Yeah, So is there a political angle to it?
no, I think that's far-fetched. And the reason why, you just have to look at some of the interviews with these people where they're talking about why they're demonstrating. They don't care about the national identity of Britain. They don't care about the Conservative Party. They don't care about who's going for elections. They got no idea about it, for one. And secondly, it's far from their mindset of what they were discussing about. The Rishi Sunak issue, for most people out there that weren't uninitiated, that vote wasn't from the whole of Britain. The average British person could not vote whether it was Rishi or Liz. It was only open to Conservative members. Leicester has an overwhelming amount of Labour supporters. So even from that element, their vote wouldn't even count towards a Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss comment. It makes no difference. The Rishi situation for most people was just saying, if you're a member of the Conservative Party, who would you want to see lead the party? Would it be this person or would it be this person? Yes, do I think ethnic bias played a role in that? Personally, I think absolutely. We did a podcast on that. But do I think that was fuel for what we saw on the streets? Not a chance. The average person in Leicester, average person in Birmingham, we cared because it was like, okay, great. You got somebody who's brown, who's ethnic minority heading in. Did most people care about the policies? No. Do most people support Conservative Party within those areas? No. Did most people think, hang on, well, is this going to change the very fabric of our lives as British individuals? Well, I think most people realize that politicians do what politicians do. They find their way into power without fear, with fear and with favor. And once they're in power, they only empower themselves. So the average person in Britain still loses out. I think that's what the reality is. So I don't think the Rishi Sunak situation had anything to do with this
But,
at all.
but I want to say something. Something very interesting development happened after yesterday evening. Okay, so that something viewers have to be aware of. In fact, we are going to do a separate video on it. Okay, there was a huge crackdown on the Islamist terrorist element in India called PFI. Okay, it's not a banned
Yeah.
organization, yes, and there were 100 plus people that have been arrested so far in UAPA. Okay, that means UAPA means even court cannot give you bail. It's a terrorist activity that comes in it. It's a very difficult thing to get a bail, and more than close to 20 states have been raided by anti-terror squad and NSA and many of the ED, especially ED for money laundering case, because they thought that could fuel this. But I just want to say, it doesn't look to me like a isolated event, if not from here.
I think it's very easy for everyone to have conjecture to say there was outside forces at play. There was the Indian government at play through the RSS. And there could be a possibility there. It was a Pakistani government at play. There's own thing. Well, it's easy to have that conjecture. I think sometimes common sense is everything but common. And in this case, you have people in the streets who only sense of validation has come through the perception of identity of religion. And only sense of validation has not been because of the uniformity that what Britain provides, but through this almost sub-abstract feelings of saying, well, not only am I British, but I want to be this, I want to be this, I want to be this. And they almost identify themselves so strongly in this one core area, they forget about our joint humanity. And that's for everybody that was involved in those riots. It wasn't just the Muslims, it was also the Hindus, it was back and forth. I think what the key issue is the fact that for too long, people have been subjected to divide and rule. People have been voting along the lines of their own ministers or councillors based upon religion and upon tribal affiliations like that, and not on economic policies. And the fact that we're not colorblind yet or religiously blind yet is part of the problem. And I think that's what caused, and the outbreak in Leicester
Absolutely.
defines that. Why could we not have councillors in certain areas that aren't part of the religious majority?
Absolutely. Just give me a minute. We will run some slides, and I'll come to you because we will have some quick question and answers
Yeah,
to wind
sure.
up the session. Okay. Just give me a minute. I just want people to know that in Bharat Marg now you can learn Sanskrit. No age limits. You anybody can register, and it is free. All you have to do is send a WhatsApp to +16479644790. Also, do know that you can become a member of Bharat Marg now and take part in all the Gau Seva, Gaudan, Nandi Seva, Nandi Dan, Pradosham Puja, Yegadasi Puja, what we do, Dwadasi Puja and Amavasya Annadan, and more good deeds. And also now and also support Bharat Marg in the process. Friends, we also take pilgrimage trips for all the senior citizens, and uh, it is senior citizen friendly and special need friendly. You can take to any Tirtha Yatra pilgrimage trips in north, west, south, east. No matter where you want to go, it's a private luxury trip with Bharat Marg. You can join us and send us a WhatsApp for more information. And one last thing, friends, now you can subscribe for our one dharmic message in the language of your choice by just sending a WhatsApp to +16479644790, absolutely free. Okay, and back to Rajanji. Rajanji, let's come for some quick question and answers. Okay,
Sure.
now we went through how the police was standing there. Now, what is the situation of the riot? Is it subsidized? Is it still hot there? What is happening?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. When the stuff happened in Birmingham, there was no news about this on the national papers here in the UK. In fact, there's no news about it on the digital papers in the UK. It only emerged a day after. Now, that to me showcases two things. Either one, this is either being suppressed because they don't want this retaliation to continue going forward, or two, is almost escaped the public's eye. Do I think that the riots have been suppressed? I think the police are doing a very sterling job in trying to crack down on this. But I think it's going to be an overwhelming task for them because this is not a question about Britishness. This isn't people almost rioting over the senses of a certain particular issue. This is almost turning into a religious void. That makes it incredibly difficult for any British police to get involved to say, okay, well, what religious stance do we take? But they are making arrests. People have been arrested and they are going to the court of justice. Whether that means that this almost squells it all, I don't know. It could continue
Is
going
it is
forward.
it calm now? What do you hear? Is it
I
kind
I
of
think I think it's
cautiously calm?
yeah, I think for me when I'm speaking to people on the ground, they're saying it's the calm before the storm. There may not be masses of people going out there, but now the fear and the anger has been drip fed into the community's minds. That creates untrust. Once you have untrust, that's where you have a lot more anger, you have a lot more fear, you have a lot more hatred, and therefore it becomes a tinderbox for future activities. So I wouldn't be saying because there's no violence in the streets that everything's fine. I think what tends to happen now is communities almost digest what's happened, and therefore the barriers go up even more so, and communities start almost becoming more insular. That's where I see the fear coming in. So that's where I believe the UK is. I think what's really interesting is that the Sikh community have not been involved. I know both sides have been trying to draw them in, but they've almost remained on the sidelines to say, look, this should not be a religious issue. This should be about the communities coming together, because ultimately, if you're in Leicester, you're living side by side. If you're in Birmingham, you're living side by side. You may go to
You
different
know,
temples or different Gurdwara or different
yeah,
mosques, but you shop
it's
in the
a,
same areas.
it's
You know,
very
so
interesting you said. I want to say it for the benefit of the viewers that my family lived in in the same apartment, okay, with the two kitchen and one home, with Sikh families, different Sikh families, for 15 years. Okay, for
yeah,
15 years we lived together.
yeah,
That is one home and two kitchen kind of situation, because in those days there was not enough quarters for the army people, so they had to share it,
absolutely.
you
That's
know
it.
and yeah, so now the situation, especially in places like Canada, UK, looks to be much different.
I think like I saw your stuff on Canada, and Canada's going through a very different vise. The question I always pose to people is saying, when you are overtly nationalistic and you live in a country like the UK, you live in Canada, you live in wherever you are right now in the US, the reality is home for you is a country that you are now residing in.
Right.
So therefore, as much as India means something to you, do you really mean anything to it that goes beyond remittances and foreign policy? The fact is, you have to think about the country that we're in and think of us not as nationals of different nations, but say we're all brotherhood of humanity. What happens in those fields on that side happens there. So therefore, to be holding a flag of whichever country here and fighting so fervently about it is as common sense as cyanide tasting. And so,
Absolutely.
therefore, when we look at these issues, we have to say, well, what is our now approach as identity? How do we create a version that collectively brings people together? Say, look, it doesn't matter what your religion is, it doesn't matter about where you come from geographically for your ancestors. The question is, how do we as people now work together for greater good for everybody, not just for one?
Absolutely. One last question, we are done. Okay. So it is being said, I just want a honest input from you, because you are from London and you know much better. It is being said that today in London there are many areas which are densely populated by certain communities, and even police are so afraid to go there. There,
I yeah.
their London law doesn't apply.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think that there are parts of the UK, not just London. I remember growing up in Birmingham that there were key issues in certain areas. But we have to remember the people who are trying to create that are not the representatives of the communities at whole. Look across the globe. What tends to happen, those people who speak the loudest, who are ill-informed but can create almost a right mentality, are the ones that find themselves at the top. They're not economists, they're not humanitarian. They're people who only validate themselves through almost a certain form of ego or pride to say, I now be the ruler of the Hindu community, the Muslim community, whichever communities it may be. They do not represent everybody. The problem lies is that those people within those communities are not speaking loud enough. And because they're not speaking
Absolutely.
loud enough, they allow this type of thing to happen. But to answer your question, is there a concern that there's certain areas in England where particular communities are almost taken hold of, whereby it becomes exclusively theirs, or at least in their mindset? Absolutely. I've seen that and witnessed it
And
myself. Does
police
that
are
need to
afraid
change?
to go there.
I don't think police are afraid to go there. I think police are being very cautious because almost this political correctness that we live in. It is difficult for the British police. They need training as well. Don't get me wrong. They need to have a bit more intercultural competence to learn how different societies and communities think. But the rule of law of a country should be applied to everybody without fear or favor. But the same thing applies in India. Same thing applies in Pakistan. The fact is, and for me personally, religion cannot become statewide. You have to have a rule of law that applies to everyone because it's a secular society, and your religion has to come second. That's why, obviously, when we speak about it, for me, you can never have a religious country. I do not believe that that should be what's happening. And I disagree with that right the way across the globe. Because as humans, we are one of a trillion species on this planet. And therefore, if we do not act with sense, this planet will fail. And the species of birds, of trees, of grass, of all those animals does not look at you with your religion. When we commit crimes, we don't do it through religion. So therefore, religion is only man-made. And therefore, we have to have a look at saying, do we provide societies whereby, regardless of your faith, we're all united towards a planetary vision where everybody prospers? So therefore, we end
Absolutely.
exclusivity.
Absolutely. I just want to thank you, okay, for coming to Bharat Marg and sharing your thoughts. It's so much valuable because you are talking from the ground on what is happening. We highly appreciate you taking your time. You're so busy, and you took your time and came and talked to us, and thank you for it. And we pray for calm. We pray for everybody being safe there. That's what our prayers are. Thank you
I
very
think I think our deepest prayer should be this. We should pray that what our minds refuse to see, our hearts are open enough to explore. So therefore, rather than looking at each other as Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Christian, Jew, we look at each other as a joint humanity that is on this planet to serve us all without fear or favor. We have to end this division, Baji, because if we don't, the people who will suffer will not just be our children or our grandchildren, but it will be the planet. There's a trillion other species on this planet along with us. We have to do what's best for them as well. But
Absolutely.
again, on my side, I like to thank you and appreciate you because I know we don't always agree on
Right.
certain things, but the fact that we do remain
In
friends
fact,
and
many
we
things.
always conversation, yeah, and we agree, we do agree on many other elements. But
Right.
I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity, as always, and reaching out because I think it showcases that at least we have the joint understanding of freedom of debate, of discussion, and our jointness of exploring what is yet to be seen.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Now
Please
you're
take care.
welcome.
Hare
Take
Krishna.
care. You too.
Hare Krishna.